Anything else? That's a really good point. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. So over here she had said they're all women, over here she had said they're all white, over here she had said there's something blocking their face in all of the pictures. Yeah?
These pictures show that intimate partner violence isn't just physical. It can also be emotional, and that's an important point because domestic violence, or the more official term these days, intimate partner abuse, it's not just physical.
So he said that it's not all just physical. So thank you all. We can move on from there. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that these are often images that we see when we talk about domestic violence, and they're images of oftentimes white women and white women
it's okay.
in heteronormative relationships.
I'm fine.
And this can be something that's hard to point out because this is something that we see all the time.
It's okay.
We see women, we often see white women, we often see white women in heteronormative relationships, and it's not something that we always take into account when we're looking at these pictures. So what is domestic violence and what does it include? According to StopVAW.org, which stands for Violence Against Women, its domestic violence is a pattern of abusive and threatening behaviors that may include physical, emotional, economic, and sexual violence, as well as intimidation, isolation, and coercion. So as he was saying over here, it's really important to point out the emotional aspect. Oftentimes we only think about the physical aspect when we're thinking about domestic violence, and emotional can often be something that's just swept under the rug or something that we don't really care about as much, which is very problematic. So in addition to that, it's about power and control. It's about possessing a sense of power over your partner. And it's something that's often learned through observation in society. So since we think of it as a sense of power over someone else, and we oftentimes associate power with men, it's hard to think that we could associate women with the abuser term. So these are some effects of domestic violence. As we can see, some of them are memory loss, depression and suicide, HIV and STI contraction, cardiovascular disease, chronic pain, and unemployment. Something important to think about is the fact that unemployment, now domestic violence can account for actually 8 million days of days off from work per year, which can be really problematic for a woman's or a man's employment. So a lot of that ties back to physical and psychological abuse as well. So as we can see here, in terms of intimate partner violence, 85% of domestic violence victims are women, and these statistics are coming from NCAD.org, which is National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So women's physical violence accounts for 33%, or that is 33% of women have been a victim of physical violence. 25% of men have been a victim of physical violence. 25% of women have been a victim of severe violence. 14% of men have been a victim of severe violence. 14% of men have been a victim of stalking, and 6% of men have been a victim of stalking as well. So, as we can see, it's oftentimes women. However, there's no reason to leave men out because they are clearly victims in this scenario as well. So, some myths about domestic violence. First one is that it's always visible. So going back to the talk about emotional aspects of domestic violence, that's not something that can be visible like bruises and scars are. So it's not something that we can always read on people. The victim always provokes the violence. That goes back to the idea of victim blaming. So to believe that the victim is the one that is provoking the violence and leaving the abuser out of the equation entirely, that's pretty much blaming the victim. Those who stay in abusive relationships are just asking for it. That is not at all the case, as that goes back to the idea of victim blaming as well. There are a multitude of reasons that a person can stay in the relationship after being abused, such as financial reasons and emotional reasons. And then batterers simply have a bad temper and the violence should be overlooked. that's a myth as well, because we need to take it a lot more seriously than that, and we can't just rely on the idea of, oh, they had a bad temper, they had a bad day. We need to take it a lot more seriously. And then it doesn't happen to certain groups of people. As we'll talk about throughout the presentation, it can happen to a multitude of groups of people. It can happen to men, it can happen to a variety of racial and ethnic groups, it can happen to a variety of sexual orientations. So what exactly is intersectionality? So it's the concept that we live contextual lives consisting of multiple identities, such as race, sex, sexuality, gender, socioeconomic status / class, ability status, etc. Though we sometimes may feel that one aspect of our identities is a lot more salient than the rest of them, all of our identities affect us in some way, even if it's not there, even if it's not visible. They're all overlapping and they're all interdependent. None of us is only a woman, none of us is only Hispanic, none of us is only gay, etc. We have plenty of identities. And these all intersect to multiply our oppressions and vulnerabilities to injustice. So as we'll see in future slides, if you're a woman, your chances of domestic violence increase. But if you're a multiracial woman, those chances increase even more from there. So some feminist issues with intersectionality in the past. First wave feminism. First wave feminism dealt a lot with the idea of women's suffrage, but it was also made for and by mostly upper-class white women, and a lot of problems that other groups of women were dealing with were not always accounted for. In terms of second wave feminism, in 1971, white feminists' desire to create a racially diverse board of the Women's Action Alliance led them to want to try and get black women on their board. However, black women often felt marginalized even when they were asked to join, so in 1973 they created the National Black Feminist Organization. And lastly, we'll talk about Betty Friedan, who was a feminist herself, but not an intersectional feminist. In 1963, she wrote the book The Feminine Mystique, which was all about 1950s and 1960s white women and their issues of unfulfillment in the home as, homemakers. However, that clearly did not address all groups of women. Lower class women have never had a chance really to be the homemaker. They've always had to go out and be with their husbands in the workforce. And then she also had issues of sexuality. She did not believe that lesbianism should be central to the feminist activism, nor should it really even be talked about, because what should be central are issues like abortion and childcare. And while those are certainly important issues, they do not, they encompass everyone, however, they do not encompass marginalized groups of women. So this is another example of our lack of intersectional feminism. So as you can see, it's a wage gap over time of women's earnings as compared to men's, and it shows the 77% figure as in women make 70 cents to every man's dollar, which is a term that we've heard so very often. However, what we don't hear as often is the fact that we can easily break this down. So for every dollar that a white man makes, white women are making 77 cents, black women are making 65 cents, and Hispanic women are making 57 cents. So again, this is not something that we talk about very often when we address the wage gap, and it's actually a very colorblind approach, which is something that we'll be talking about in a couple slides. So this all revolves around the idea of universalism versus cultural relativism. And another term for this can be culturally neutral versus culturally competent. So the idea of universalism is that the same rules and procedures should be used across race, ethnicities, and cultures, and etc. Everyone goes through the same situations with the same emotions involved, and contextual evidence is therefore unnecessary. But cultural relativism believes that situations are culturally dependent. They do not happen to everyone equally or create the same emotions for everyone, and contextual evidence needs to be employed when we're understanding situations. And this presentation is really going to be from a cultural relative standpoint. So what is colorblind ideology? Colorblind ideology can be defined as a new covert version of racism. It's something that, when people are saying, I don't see color, what they're often doing is they're just eliminating different groups of people and saying that, we're all the same. When the truth is that we're not all the same, and we need to acknowledge that. It's a belief that racial oppression no longer exists, and therefore racial differences no longer exist. And some implications of this. From a social inequality standpoint, if we're saying this, we're believing that if people are not succeeding, it's simply because of who they are as a person, not because of any sort of structural identities. However, that's clearly not the case. And from a domestic violence standpoint, we can see that there are many different statistics in terms of domestic violence when it comes to different groups of women. So, intersectionality within domestic violence, this is a quote from Tricia Bent Goodley, who oftentimes has written on domestic violence in terms of the Black woman's perspective. It affects diverse groups of people, so it should be treated as a diverse issue. It's not so much a homogeneous epidemic. It's certainly different across social stratifications and therefore should be treated as such. So first of all, we'll talk about statistical differences in domestic violence across racial groups. So all these statistics come from the 2010 summary report for the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which is made by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC. So first of all, we can see that the highest rates among racial groups for domestic violence are in the American Indian or Alaska Native and multiracial categories. Unfortunately, we don't have as many statistics on Asian or Pacific Islanders, but overall we can see that they have lower rates. So again, talking about multiracial and American Indian or Alaska Native groups, they're at 53% and 46% for having experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking. Whereas when we talk about white groups and Hispanic groups, they're only at 34% and 37% respectively. And then we also have some charts on men's experiences with rape, physical violence, or stalking. However, we seem to have a lot less information when it comes to those people. So, but again, you can see that the same groups have the same prevalences pretty much. Multiracial men have 39% of multiracial men have experienced domestic violence, with 45% of American Indian or Alaska Native men having experienced domestic violence, and Black men are not too far behind. So when we look at this visually, we can see that on aggregate, whites and Hispanics tend to experience the least amount of domestic violence. However, looking over on the right side of the chart, we can see that it's disproportionately higher for American Indians or Alaska Natives. And this is why it's important to look at intersections. If we were to only examine white women's experiences when we're talking about domestic violence, we would leave out a plethora of other groups and other statistics. So what might be some barriers to Latinx, which is Latino or Latina, and Asian immigrants in receiving domestic violence services? Well, first of all, if they are immigrants, they may not have the support and encouragement from their families as we may have if we are from this country. And when surrounded by their family, have support systems in order to get help. Next up, there's little knowledge regarding legal rights in the United States if you're new to the country. And that when you're newer to the country, there's going to be a lot less familiarity with domestic violence policies. There are language barriers, so if they don't speak the English language very well, maybe it'll be a lot more difficult for them to receive those services as well. They're potentially not used to a culture where domestic violence is to be taken seriously, depending on which country they're from, and they have a fear of bringing shame to the family potentially as well, in that, that goes back to the idea of victim blaming. And some barriers to Blacks in receiving domestic violence services. First of all, they may have a lack of trust in criminal justice or social services. So research has shown that a lot of Black women have experienced discrimination and stereotyping when they go and receive these services. There's a lot of stereotypes in our society about hypersexualization of women, or the perception that Black women are aggressive and therefore are not in need of these services. There's the issue of geographic locations. So communities of color tend to have a lot less access to the domestic violence service locations. And if they're relying on their partner for money or for transportation when they're going to receive these services, that can serve as a problem as well, as you can imagine. There's the fear that communities may not welcome them. So if they're going to receive services amongst groups of people that don't look like them, maybe they'll feel a little uncomfortable there. There's the idea of loyalty to their group. So if they're being beaten by someone else who is also Black, maybe they feel that they need to be more loyal to their group as opposed to loyal to themselves and getting themselves help. And then there's the idea of not wanting to be labeled as a domestic violence victim in fear of being identified with white feminism. Again, this goes back to our topic of intersectionality. Since so many people have ingrained in their minds that feminism is often about white women, often about heterosexual women, they may not want to identify with that group as they feel that they don't identify with it and are just going to be left out. So universal therapies for domestic violence are often what are used in terms of counseling services and in terms of social work services. A lot of counselors and social workers, while they may learn about it in their classes, do not often employ intersectionality in their therapies, which causes them to intervene in the wrong ways potentially and may hurt rather than help their client. And there's the idea that intervention should not be based on the individual, but rather on social and economic inequities as well. So when looking at these cases, we need to examine social and economic issues that also may be affecting the individual. This is also called private troubles versus public issues, in which we examine one person's problem as being contextualized and as being a result of a lot of outside factors. So one example of a culturally based approach is the Black experience-based social work approach. This was developed by Elmer and Joanne Martin, and it centers around and emphasizes Black identity in terms of Black experiences, Black values, Black perspectives, and Black methods of problem solving. So there are 3 stages to this, and the first stage is the moaning stage, which is consisting of letting feelings out. It's important to create a safe place for the woman or man with no judgment, as oftentimes Black people may feel like they can't express their emotions in terms of domestic violence. We need to assess cultural history in terms of how our cultural history has led us to this point of disproportional battering of Black women and men. And we need to have honest discussions of race and discrimination and how those can be playing a role as well. The second stage is the mourning stage, and that's overcoming the grief. So the woman must know that her feelings are validated and that she's being taken seriously. Again, validation plays a big role here as well. And there's also the idea that group grief therapy will include discussions of separation and loss, which is a central aspect of this BEDSW approach. So we need to understand that this person is losing a significant other or a source of financial aid, or maybe even just a friend, and we need to discover where this person should go from there. And lastly, there's the mourning stage without the you. So that's the idea of arrival of a new day or hope for change. And again, this is tying into the idea of public issues and how society and policy can help prevent this in the future. We need collective, social, economic, and political empowerment. We need to treat it as not just a women's issue, but as a societal issue. We need to educate the community on these types of violence. And then there's the idea of knowledge of historical and contemporary events and how these translate into applied approaches to address the oppression. Again, using historical and cultural context in addressing the oppression, examining why Black men and women are disproportionately affected, and how this can be a result of how we view them in society and how we've always viewed them in society. So next we move on to statistical differences in domestic violence across sexual orientation. So now these statistics come from the 2010 findings on victimization by sexual orientation, also presented by CDC. So on this first chart here, we can see that unfortunately we can't get many stats on lesbian women in terms of rape, physical violence, and or stalking, as we can get with bisexual and heterosexual women. However, we can definitely see when we're looking at the overall amounts that bisexual women are impacted most at 61%, unfortunately, as opposed to 43% for lesbian women and 35% for heterosexual women. And then we also have this chart for men. We have even less information when it comes to men, unfortunately. But as we can see, once again, bisexual men are experiencing the most rape, physical violence, and or stalking. However, gay and heterosexual men seem to experience similar rates. So when we visualize this in terms of overall rates, we can see that it's largely bisexuals and in terms of sexual orientation that are exposed to the most domestic violence. And this is really the case for bisexual women as well. So then they also break this down into different types of violence. So the first is sexual violence among women. Again, we can see, unfortunately we don't have any statistics for lesbian women, but again we can see that it's largely bisexual women that are being impacted here as opposed to heterosexual women, though they are also impacted. Unfortunately, we didn't have a slide on sexual violence for men for some reason, but when it comes to physical violence, we can see, for women that is, we can see that bisexual women are most impacted once again, with lesbian women and then heterosexual women after that. And then when it comes to men's physical violence, and interestingly enough, they all seem to be impacted at relatively low amounts. So then moving on to psychological aggression. There's a lot more psychological aggression than there were in the previous slides when it came to physical and sexual violence. And again, this goes back to our talk of emotional abuse. As you can see, emotional abuse is very prevalent in relationships, but it's not always something that's talked about, unfortunately. So as we can see, while they are all experiencing high rates, it's bisexual women, once again, that are experiencing the highest rates at 76%. And then when we move on to this chart for men, they are all kind of experiencing similar rates, with gay men experiencing the most at around 59.6%. And then we can break this down into a visual graph as well, in which we can see that, once again, it's bisexual women that are experiencing it the most. However, as you can see across all groups, they're experiencing it quite a bit. So why might there be marginalization within lesbian, gay, and bisexual domestic violence? Why might this be something that's hard to come across on the internet? Well, the way that we talk about domestic violence oftentimes leaves out lesbian, gay, and bisexual couples. When we present all victims as she or her and all abusers as he or him, that really marginalizes lesbian, gay, and bisexual groups. And also, there's just the belief that lesbian, gay, and bisexual people can't be considered battered for a variety of reasons. So first of all, there's the idea of legitimacy. Maybe we don't see these couples as actual couples if we only see heterosexual couples as the real couples, and therefore there can't be battering in the relationships. There's the idea that it's a fight between equals. So if a man and a man are together, there's not going to be one overpowering the other because they're both men. If there's two women, then one can't overpower the other because they're both women. And then there's also the stereotype that lesbian women are aggressive and therefore they can't be battered, which is of course problematic as well. So differences in domestic violence across socioeconomic status or class. So if you're unfamiliar with the term socioeconomic status, the idea is that it's a much broader term than classes. So it takes into account income, wealth, education, and occupational prestige, and a variety of other terms as well. So who is most at risk when it comes to socioeconomic status? We find that there's an inverse relationship between socioeconomic status and domestic violence rates, which means that as socioeconomic status goes up, the chance of the person being battered goes down. Studies have found that intimate partner violence is much more prevalent in severe and economically disadvantaged areas. There's twice as likely in disadvantaged versus advantaged neighborhoods. Interestingly enough, it seems that when we control for economic characteristics, African Americans and whites seem to have similar levels of intimate partner violence, so class may even be playing a bigger role than race is when we talk about this. One study actually found that the women who were most at risk were those in disadvantaged neighborhoods and those who had partners with job instability. So as we can see, two very big factors when it comes to domestic violence are going to be job instability and where you live. Those are big risk factors. So this is one chart that I was able to find from the CDC. There actually were not too many charts when it came to socioeconomic status in terms of domestic violence. But we can see that women and men who are making under $25,000 are much more likely than men and women making over $75,000 to be abused. So why might this correlation exist? So there are a lot of benefits of employment, and if a person is of lower socioeconomic status, they're less likely to be employed, obviously. So employment offers a lot of benefits. There's better psychological health and self-esteem, which can allow you to cope better with your situation. There's social support from your coworkers, so they can serve as your support system if you're feeling abused at home. And there's the idea that you have your own finances to allow you to leave the situation more easily. If you depend on your partner for the finances, there's a lesser likelihood of you being able to leave the situation. But when you have your own finances, you're more able to leave the situation. There's more of a likelihood of you having a poor husband if you're in a lower socioeconomic status. So it has been theorized in the past that if husbands cannot show their masculinity through financial ways, they'll do so through aggression. So if a man is not able to support his wife, maybe he'll be able to show his masculinity through being aggressive towards her. And there's the fact that there's greater unemployment rates in lower socioeconomic status areas. So are these statistics necessarily accurate though? Well, most of our available data come from individuals who use social services, and these people are much more likely to be in poverty. So right off the bat, we have a sample size of people that are more likely to be in poverty. And then there's also the fact that upper class people may be able to simply keep their domestic violence hidden better. They have more money to stay at a hotel to escape their partners. They have more access to private physicians rather than going to public services. And they live on private, larger properties. And violence is not going to be as audible as if you were, say, living in an apartment building. So when you contrast this with race and sexuality, it's kind of ironic because the class privilege is actually hurting rather than helping the person. The normally dominant class is swept into the margins in this context. So whereas people with higher socioeconomic status are going to be privileged everywhere else, in domestic violence cases, maybe they're not seen as the type of people that would be receiving domestic violence. And there's a perception that the upper class are just more civilized people living more sanitized lives. There's a perception that it doesn't happen in such a perfect world and that violence is just reserved for the lower class. It can make the action more stigmatized since we don't think that it happens in these areas. If a woman or man is to come out and say that it is happening, we may think that's a little weird and associate a stigma with it. And then there's the belief that there's just more to lose if you're coming from a higher socioeconomic status. An example of this is Linda Perea, who was the ex-wife of wrestler Hulk Hogan. She had alleged that he physically and emotionally abused her, and she stated in her memoir that their empire would collapse after she outed him. So, as you can see, there's a lot more to lose if you're from higher socioeconomic status, so you're a lot less likely to want to go and report this. So how do we resolve these issues? That's a really important topic when we're talking about domestic violence in terms of marginalization. How do we help this problem, and how do we bring to the center problems that have been marginalized for so long? So some possible solutions. Maybe put greater education towards social workers and counselors when it comes to intersectionality. We know that these problems exist, so we need to apply therapy techniques towards them. More treatment center locations in disadvantaged areas, since we know that these areas oftentimes do not receive those treatment center locations. Inclusion of diverse groups of women as policymakers and social service workers. In this case, we would have a variety of voices and perspectives to hear from in decision-making processes. And of course, we would need more multilingual social service workers in terms of helping those that do not necessarily speak English as well. There's the idea that we need to start dismissing stereotypes. If we believe that domestic violence can only happen towards white women of lower socioeconomic statuses, we're going to leave out a plethora of other groups. So we need to dismiss those stereotypes in order to help out everybody. And overall, we just need greater knowledge in the community about intersectionality, not even just in terms of domestic violence, but as a whole. So some things to keep in mind when we're talking about this topic: numbers are not always 100% accurate. Self-reported data can oftentimes be problematic for a few different reasons. The first one is the social desirability bias. And this is the idea that people are more likely to put down in surveys or answer in interviews answers that they think are more socially desirable rather than the answers that are actually the truth. And they may not want to label what happened to them as the surveys may want them to. So if something happened to them in the past that may be construed as rape, maybe they still don't identify it as actual rape and are more likely to put down no on the survey. And also it's a double-edged sword. So obviously we need to include everyone when we're talking about domestic violence because it can happen to everyone. We also need to shine a light on some particular groups where it is much more likely to happen.